"Sit down, my children, and listen to a tale of pride and the wind." The city of Lagos was drowning in a heavy silver rain that blurred the neon lights into ghosts. In the heart of the great city square, an old man named Mazi Ekin stood shivering. His clothes were rags that clung to his thin bones like wet leaves. He was a shadow among the giants of stone and glass. Suddenly, he lifted his head, squinting through the downpour at a massive billboard towering 30 stories high. It glowed with a light so fierce it seemed to pierce the storm. As his eyes focused on the golden letters, his body began to shake. He tried to cry out, to gasp, to say a name that had been buried in the red earth years ago, but his throat locked. He stood in a silent scream. To understand why a man loses his voice, we must travel back to the village of Amu, long before the city swallowed the horizon. Mazi Ekin was then a man of great ego, a man who walked as if the ground were honored to feel his feet. He was obsessed with his legacy, believing that only a lion's son could carry his name into eternity. When his first wife, Enani, went into labor, Ekin paced outside like a hungry predator. He had visited a false oracle who whispered lies into his ear for a bag of cowries. "A son is coming," the oracle had promised. "A son who will swallow the sun." But when the midwife finally stepped out, she did not carry a lion. She carried a quiet, beautiful girl named Adana. Ekin did not celebrate. He looked at the child and saw only a mistake. From that day, the house of Mazi Ekin became a place of cold shadows for little Adana. While her father eventually had the sons he desired with a second wife, Adana was treated as an invisible ghost. She did not sleep on a mat inside the house. She was sent to the goat pen, where the air smelled of dry hay and animals. She wore the tattered sacks that once held grain, while her brothers wore fine cotton. When the family sat to eat rich pounded yam and egusi soup, Adana waited by the back door for the scraps. Her father never called her name. If he looked at her, his eyes were like two stones in a frozen river. He blamed her for every misfortune, believing the false oracle's words that a firstborn daughter was a curse upon a man's house. Despite the cruelty, Adana carried a secret light within her. She had what the village elders called golden sight. While her brothers played and broke things, Adana watched the world. She noticed how the soil moved and how the smallest herbs reacted to the sun. One afternoon, the great tree in the village square began to wither, its leaves turning into gray ash. The elders wept, for the tree was the soul of Amu. Secretly, at night, Adana crept to the tree. She mixed bitter roots with the morning dew and whispered to the bark. Within a week, the tree sprouted vibrant green leaves that glowed like emeralds. Mazi Ekin saw her standing by the trunk one dawn. Instead of pride, he felt a dark, cold fear. "Witchcraft," he hissed, his voice a poisonous snake. He did not see a healer, he saw a threat. The seasons turned, and a great drought fell upon the land of Amu. The sky became a sheet of hot brass, and the earth cracked open like thirsty mouths. The village wells, once deep and cool, gave up nothing but red dust. The Crops died in the fields, standing like skeletal soldiers in the heat. Mazi Ekin's wealth began to vanish as his cattle fell one by one. The village was gripped by a frantic, clawing terror. People began to whisper that someone among them had offended the spirits. The false oracle, desperate to hide his own lack of power, pointed a shaking finger toward the house of Ekin. He claimed the drought was caused by an unclean firstborn who was sucking the moisture from the clouds. The village turned its hungry, angry eyes toward the girl who lived in the goat pen. Mazi Ekin's second wife, a woman with a heart like a sharpened flint, saw an opportunity. She whispered to Ekin every night as the heat pressed down on their roof. "The oracle has spoken," she murmured. "Our sons will die of thirst because of that girl. Do you want to lose your lions for the sake of a curse?" Ekin, whose pride was his only remaining possession, felt the pressure of the village's judgment. He imagined the people laughing at him, saying he was too weak to save Amu. His love for his reputation was far greater than his mercy for his flesh and blood. He convinced himself that Adana was the reason his barns were empty. He decided that to save his name, he would have to cut the branch that he believed was rotting his entire tree. The day of the trial of the Iron Gate arrived under a sun that felt like fire. The entire village gathered in silence, their faces gaunt and desperate. Mazi Ekin stood at the center, holding a heavy clay pot filled with the last of his water. Adana stood before him, her small frame trembling, her eyes searching his for a single spark of fatherly love. She found nothing. With a voice that boomed like hollow thunder, Ekin spoke. "You have no father, and I have no daughter," he declared. He smashed the clay pot at her feet, the water soaking into the dust and vanishing instantly. "From this moment, may the wind erase your name from the memory of Amu." It was a public execution of her identity. The crowd watched as he turned his back, leaving her standing amidst the jagged shards. The banishment was not finished. Ekin dragged Adana to the very edge of the evil forest, a place where the trees grew in twisted, angry shapes, and the sunlight feared to tread. He pushed her toward the darkness and warned her never to look back. Adana stumbled into the brush, her heart feeling like a bird hitting a stone wall. She did not run. She sat at the edge of the forest for 3 days and 3 nights, her eyes fixed on the path back to the village. She hoped that her father would realize his mistake. She waited for the sound of his footsteps, imagining him coming to take her hand and say he was sorry. But the only sound was the dry wind and the mocking laughter of hyenas in the distance. Her father never came. On the 4th morning, when Adana's strength had faded to a whisper, a shadow fell over her. It was not her father, but an old woman named Enneka. Enneka was a blind exile who had lived in the forest for 20 years, forgotten by the world. Her eyes were clouded white like morning mist, but she moved with a strange, sure grace. "The earth told me a heavy heart was crying," Enneka said, her voice like the rustle of dry silk. She reached out and touched Adana's face with fingers that felt like warm wood. She did not see Adana's rags or her tears. She felt the heat of the golden sight radiating from the girl's soul. Enneka led Adana deep into the forest, to a hidden cave where crystals grew from the ceiling, dripping cool, sweet water into stone basins. In the silence of the cave, Enneka became the mother Adana never truly had. She did not teach her to cook or sew for a husband. She taught her the language of the hidden world. The eyes of men only see what is already there, Enneka whispered as they sat among the glowing crystals. But the heart, Adana, the heart sees what asterisk could asterisk be. She taught Adana how to listen to the heartbeat of the soil and how to find the wealth hidden in things others discarded. Adana learned that the cursed minerals of the forest could be turned into dyes, and the bitter herbs could be turned into life-saving medicines. Her golden sight grew sharper. She realized that her father had thrown away a diamond because he was too busy looking for a common stone. She began to grow strong. One afternoon, while exploring a ravine that the villagers feared, Adana discovered a rare, blue-leafed herb. It grew in the most sour, metallic soil, thriving where nothing else could. Enneka gasped when Adana described it. "That is the azure breath," Enneka said. "It is the only cure for the great fever that kills kings and beggars alike." Adana realized that the very ground Mazi Ekin called cursed was actually a treasure house of life. She spent her days harvesting the herbs and refining the oils, guided by Enneka's wisdom. She was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a woman discovering that her exile was not a prison, but a kingdom. She looked at her hands, stained blue by the herbs, and realized they were the hands of a person who could heal the world. Eventually, the world came knocking at the forest's door. Faint trails led bold traders to the edge of the woods, seeking the legendary blue oil that was curing sickness in the distant cities. Adana stepped out from the shadows to meet them. She did not ask for much at first, but she was a daughter of an accountant's village. She knew the value of a coin. She traded her oils for gold, for seeds, and for books. Each time a trader left, Adana felt the weight of her success growing. She realized that the money she earned in a single day was more than Mazi Ekin had seen in a year. Her worthless life was proving to be a gold mine. She looked toward the direction of Amu and felt a strange, quiet peace. The wind had not erased her. It had carried her. While Adana rose, the house of Mazi Ekin began to crumble like dry bread. His lion sons had grown into men who valued gold but hated work. They were greedy and lazy, spending their father's remaining wealth on city clothes and expensive palm wine. They did not care for the land or the cattle. One by one, they sold off the family's ancestral fields to pay for their gambling debts in the nearby towns. Mazi Ekin watched in horror as his legacy vanished into the pockets of strangers. He tried to speak to his sons, but they laughed at him, calling him an old man who lived in the past. His second wife, seeing the well was dry, eventually fled to her brother's house, leaving Ekin alone in a compound that was now a hollow shell. Deep in the forest, Enneka's time on earth began to fade like a sunset. On her final night, she called Adana to her side. The cave was filled with the soft hum of the crystals. "Do not seek revenge, my daughter," Enneka whispered, her hand trembling in Adana. "Revenge is a fire that burns the house of the one who starts it. Instead, seek the heights. Build a world so large that the shadows of the past cannot reach you." With those words, the blind mother passed away, leaving Adana with a map to the great city and a heart that was no longer broken. Adana buried Enneka under the azure breath herbs and packed her bags. She was leaving the forest behind, but she was taking its magic and its strength with her into the world of men. Adana arrived in the great city of Lagos like a drop of water in an ocean. It was a place of iron, noise, and light. She did not tell anyone her name or where she came from. She started small, selling her medicinal oils from a tiny stall in the corner of the busiest market. She wore a simple veil, hiding her face from the world. But the quality of her work spoke for her. Her oils were purer, and her accounting was perfect. She saw the value in the city's waste, turning discarded scrap into shipping crates. 5 years passed in a whirlwind of labor and vision. Slowly, the street stall became a shop, the shop became a warehouse, and the warehouse became a fleet. She became known as the Silent Queen, a mystery who owned the very pulse of the city's trade. Adana's empire grew until it touched every corner of the kingdom. She owned the ships that brought grain and the factories that made cloth. Yet, she remained a ghost to the public. She never attended the grand balls or gave interviews to the city papers. She spent her wealth building hospitals and schools, always remembering the girl in the goat pen. She hired thousands of people, but her most trusted advisors were women who had been rejected by their families. She was building a new kind of legacy, one based on merit rather than blood. Despite her power, she often sat alone in her high office, looking out at the city lights. She had reached the heights Enneka spoke of, but she knew that the final chapter of her story was still waiting to be written in the dust. Back in the village of Amu, the ruin was complete. Mazi Ekin was kicked out of his own compound by a debt collector who had bought the land from his youngest son. The man who once walked like a king was now a beggar. He slept under the same village tree Adana had once healed, but the people did not offer him food. They looked at him with pity or scorn, remembering how he had treated his firstborn. His sons had vanished into the city, leaving him with nothing but a tattered wrap and a wooden staff. He realized that the lions he had cherished were actually vultures who had picked his bones clean. In his desperation, he heard stories of a generous queen in the great city who helped the poor. He decided to walk there. The journey to the great city took Mazi Ekin 3 months. He walked until his feet were a mass of blisters, and his back was bent like a bow. He begged for water from travelers and ate the rinds of fruit left by the roadside. On the highway, grand carriages pulled by sleek horses would splash him with mud as they raced toward the capital. He did not know that inside one of those carriages, sitting behind velvet curtains, was the daughter he had pushed into the evil forest. He was a speck of dust on the road she owned. He arrived at the gates of the city, overwhelmed by the noise and the sheer size of the buildings. He felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life, a grain of sand in a desert of stone. Mazi Ekin wandered into the great city square, his eyes wide with terror and wonder. He had never seen buildings that touched the clouds. He approached a man wearing a fine suit and asked in a trembling voice, "Please, sir, who owns this great city? Who is the queen that provides the bread for the poor?" The man laughed, but it wasn't a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of someone stating an obvious fact. He pointed his finger upward toward the sky. "Look up, old man," the stranger said. "Her name is everywhere. She is the mother of our economy. Without her, this city would stop breathing." Ekin lifted his tired, rheumy eyes, following the man's finger toward a massive structure that dominated the skyline. It was the largest billboard he had ever seen. The cinematic moment froze time. The billboard was a masterpiece of gold and light. In letters that seemed to be made of captured sunshine, it read, "Adanna Ekene, Mother of the Nation *." Below the name was a list of her achievements, hospitals, schools, and the shipping lines that fed the hungry. Mazi Ekin stared at the name Adanna. He stared at his own family name, Ekene. The shock was a physical blow to his heart. It was as if the shattered clay pot from years ago had suddenly reformed and struck him in the chest. His brain refused to accept the truth, yet his soul knew it instantly. The daughter he had disowned, the curse he had tried to erase, was the very person who held the world in her hands. His voice died in his throat. The shock was so immense that something inside Mazi Ekin's mind simply snapped. He tried to speak, to yell her name, to cry out for forgiveness, but no sound came. He had suffered a stroke of the spirit. He stood there, his mouth working silently like a fish out of water. He realized the ultimate irony. He had used his voice to curse her and cast her out. And now, when he needed that voice to reclaim her, it was gone. He fell to his knees in the middle of the crowded square, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. People walked past him, seeing only another broken beggar. He looked up at the golden letters one last time before his vision blurred into darkness. He had finally seen his daughter, but she was now a sun too bright for his eyes. Mazi Ekin was picked up by a city ambulance, one of the many vehicles funded by the Adanna Foundation. They took him to a clean, white hospital, the Adanna Memorial Ward. He lay in a soft bed with white sheets, receiving the best care in the kingdom. The doctors spoke of him as a charity case, a nameless man found in the square. For 2 weeks, he lay there, unable to move his tongue or make a sound. He watched the nurses move with efficiency and kindness, all of them wearing a badge with his daughter's name. He was surrounded by her mercy, being kept alive by the very witchcraft and curse he had feared. He spent his silent hours in a hell of his own making, haunted by the memory of a little girl in a goat pen. One morning, the hospital went into a frenzy of preparation. The queen was coming for an inspection. Mazi Ekin's heart hammered against his ribs. The doors swung open, and a woman stepped in. She was dressed in a charcoal gray coat of the finest wool, her movements graceful and filled with a quiet power. She did not wear a crown, but she didn't need one. Adana walked from bed to bed, speaking softly to the patients. When she reached the end of the ward, she stopped at Ekin's bed. She looked down at the broken, silent man. She did not see a king or a father. She saw a soul in pain. Ekin tried to sit up, his eyes bulging with a desperate plea for recognition. He tried to form the word daughter, but his mouth only let out a dry, hollow wheezing. Adana's golden sight did not fail her. She looked into the eyes of the beggar and saw the man who had smashed the pot at her feet. The room went cold. Her advisors waited for her to speak, to command the guards to throw the man out or to let him rot. But Adana remembered Enneka's words about the fire of revenge. She reached out and placed a cool hand on Ekin's forehead. It was the first time she had touched him in over 20 years. She did not call him father, and she did not smile. "You are safe here," she said, her voice steady and calm. "In this house, everyone is fed, even those who forgot how to love." She turned and walked away, leaving him in a bed of luxury that felt like a prison of gold. Adana went on to open the Adana School of Wisdom, a place where children were taught that every life has value, regardless of their birth. Mazi Ekin lived out his days in a quiet house on the edge of the city, provided for by a daughter who never visited him again. He sat on his porch every day, watching the billboards in the distance. He was a man who had his legacy, but he could not speak to it. He had his sons' names erased by their own greed, while the name he tried to destroy became eternal. The story of Adana and Ekin became a legend told around fires. It reminds us that pride is a hollow house, and kindness is the only true gold. What lesson do you take from the silence of Mazi Ekin?